For the first time, the headlights of the Allied tanks illuminated the barbed wire fences of Bergen-Belsen, revealing a horrifying scene: heaped corpses and the labored breathing of emaciated prisoners. And amid that chaos, the silhouettes of the SS women, once the camp's indifferent mistresses, had vanished as if they had never existed. Who were they? How did they escape? And would justice reach those who once held the power of life and death? Let us uncover one of the least known chapters of the Holocaust: the journey from the training benches of Ravensbruck to the military trials that delivered justice for approximately 3,500 murderous women in the final months of the Second World War. As wave after wave of Allied armored and infantry divisions poured across Germany's borders, the collapse of the Third Reich became undeniable. At notorious concentration camps such as Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Stutthof, hundreds of SS female personnel, once regarded as the camp's indifferent mistresses, abruptly abandoned their posts. Some burned secret documents, the flames consuming evidence of their crimes. Others hastily tore off their insignia and discarded their SS uniforms, then melted into the chaotic civilian population. Still others merely gathered civilian clothes and slipped away in the flood of displaced persons, leaving behind the dim corridors and iron gates that had been the locus of their absolute power. Before this mass defection, these SS overseers had undergone specialized training at the Ravensbruck Center. There, they studied Aryan supremacist ideology, listened to lectures on the mission of purification, and practiced violent drills ranging from crowd control to the use of whips and personal firearms. Each woman had to demonstrate ruthless cruelty toward prisoners, dehumanized as objects with no claim to basic humanity. After 4 weeks of instruction, they became essential cogs in the extermination apparatus, responsible for supervising living quarters, coordinating forced labor, and personally participating in the selections that determined life or death as incoming transports arrived. When Germany formally surrendered in May 1945, the names of thousands of SS female overseers were recorded in Allied military reports. Yet, in the days following the signing ceremonies, their fates and whereabouts fell into mysterious silence. Many escaped without anyone ever discovering their final destinations. Countless others succeeded in eluding capture thanks to post-war disorder, SS personnel records being scattered or destroyed, and insufficient civilian staffing to investigate each individual. The pressing question emerged: what became of these murderous women after the fall of the Third Reich? And did the Allied forces genuinely pursue them to bring them to justice? The series, Guardians of the Third Reich, promises to uncover one of history's least known chapters: the direct participation of women in the Nazi terror machine, where power and violence were entrusted to hands that had once seemed gentle. The mobilization of women into the Nazi apparatus of repression represented a pivotal turning point, shattering the misconception that systemic violence was exclusively a male domain. From 1939 onward, approximately 3,500 women answered evocative newspaper appeals proclaiming female military personnel aged 20 to 40 needed high wages, full board, comfortable lodging, and complimentary uniforms. Yet the complimentary uniforms were SS attire, and the vaunted military service was in reality the brutal oversight of concentration camps. Economic desperation proved the decisive factor in recruitment. For many young women born into poverty, with limited education and few professional prospects, camp duty offered wages far exceeding those of factory labor. Paired with the promise of stable housing and financial independence, a secure barracks bunk and regular rations, however meager to the prisoners, seemed a lifeline to those who had known only hardship and scarcity. In the eyes of recruiters, these women were ideal candidates, pliable, motivated by need, and eager to claim the trappings of authority. Yet financial incentive alone did not explain the phenomenon. Ideological indoctrination had already taken root in many recruits through participation in Hitler-Jugend youth organizations. These young women had been steeped in Aryan supremacist rhetoric, primed to view themselves as the vanguard of racial purity. When presented with the prospect of serving their Führer and their fatherland, they embraced the role with fervor. The propaganda woven into the recruitment ads reinforced this narrative, casting camp oversight as an honorable duty in the defense of Germany's future. It was only after stepping into their roles that some recruits grasped the job's horrific reality. The glamorous promise of uniformed prestige gave way to a daily regimen of command over human, suffering, mustering exhausted prisoners for roll call, enforcing punishments without hesitation, and presiding over selections that consigned the weakest to immediate extermination. The bloodlust of the regime found its instruments in these women, who learned to wield whips and firearms with equal efficiency. Those uneasy at first were soon hardened by the machinery of terror. Their consciences blunted by routine and ideological zeal, the marriage of economic motive and political conviction forged a workforce whose loyalty was as reliable as it was ruthless. For the Nazi leadership, female guards became indispensable cogs in the industrialized system of death. They oversaw barracks, organized forced labor squads, and ensured that every functionary roll guard, clerk, overseer facilitated the overarching goal, the annihilation of Europe's undesirables. In casting ordinary women as perpetrators, the regime demonstrated its capacity to mobilize all segments of society in service of genocide. Thus, the involvement of women in the SS Guard Corps stands as one of the most chilling illustrations of Nazi innovation in terror. The veneer of respectability offered by steady pay and social status masked a truth more sinister: that ordinary individuals, fueled by economic aspiration and ideological indoctrination, could become architects of atrocity. It was a lesson in how swiftly the veneer of civilization can fracture when power and propaganda converge to subvert empathy into brutality. Ravensbruck, located in northern Germany, served as the exclusive training center for all female concentration camp guards. There, each recruit endured an intensive 4-week program that fused ideological indoctrination with hands-on brutality drills. From day one, candidates were subjected to a relentless barrage of Aryan supremacist doctrine, convinced that their sacred mission was to purify German society by eliminating those deemed racially or politically inferior. Any hint of compassion or moral hesitation was ruthlessly excised from their minds. On the practical front, trainees mastered the art of corridor management, learning to herd prisoners like livestock through narrow passageways. They drilled on crowd control tactics designed to break spirits, whip cracks, echoing in dimly lit barracks. Precise formations to prevent any semblance of solidarity among the incarcerated. Weapons training was equally exacting. Recruits handled pistols and rifles until muscle memory rendered them extensions of cold authority. One misstep in aim or hesitation in discipline was met with harsh reprimand. Failure was intolerable. Corporal punishment techniques were taught with clinical precision. Instructors demonstrated flogging methods that would leave welts and scars, but still allow prisoners to walk the next day, thus maximizing suffering without disrupting forced labor quotas. Women learned interrogation methods that combined physical pain with psychological terror, stress positions, until limbs trembled. Sleep deprivation until reality blurred. Threats calibrated to break the most resilient spirit. Each exercise served to erode empathy, replacing it with an unyielding readiness to obey any order, no matter how barbaric. Alongside these violent practices, recruits were schooled in camp administration. They memorized prisoner registries, mastered ledger keeping for food rations, and tracked work detail assignments down to the last forced march. Every document served as a cog in the extermination machine. Accurate records ensured that quotas for labor and death were met without bureaucratic hiccups. The message was clear. Paperwork could kill just as efficiently as gunfire. Above all, the program demanded absolute emotional detachment. Trainees were conditioned to view inmates as mere objects, subhuman elements, with no claim to dignity or rights. Any display of pity was branded as weakness. Instructors enforced this mindset through mock roll calls where volunteers posing as prisoners were subjected to humiliating searches and verbal abuse. The lesson, compliance, and cruelty must go hand in hand. By the end of the 4-week regimen, ordinary women had been remolded into precise instruments of terror. Their consciences were effectively erased, replaced by a rigid ideology that justified unspeakable violence in the name of racial purity. Prepared to oversee every aspect of the camp, from daily roll calls to the most horrific selections for gas chambers, these women departed Ravensbruck, not as civilians, but as trained operatives of genocide. Under this brutal tutelage, each graduate emerged ready to unleash fear and enforce order with an iron fist. Ravensbruck did not simply impart skills. It forged a bond of unwavering loyalty to the SS and the final solution. The result was a cadre of female guards whose capacity for cruelty matched that of any of their male counterparts, and whose readiness to kill became a linchpin in the Nazi death apparatus. Once their training concluded, the female overseers were dispatched across the sprawling network of concentration camps. Beyond the grim task of policing the barracks and assigning forced labor details, they assumed a far more sinister duty: participation in the selection process. The instant a transport of new prisoners rattled through the gates, in that pivotal moment, these women held the power to consign a human being either to slave labor under brutal conditions or to the gas chambers without delay. Their judgment was absolute, unmitigated by mercy or hesitation. These overseers conducted humiliating body searches with cold efficiency, stripping prisoners of every shred of dignity. They guarded the pitiful rations with merciless vigilance, aware that each mouthful withheld hastened to death by starvation. When defiance or weakness surfaced, they wielded whips and truncheons like extensions of state authority. Shackles bit into flesh, limbs quivered under beatings, and reinforced interrogation techniques reduced proud individuals to quaking compliance. All the while, they oversaw the logistics of mass disposal crematoria, burial pits, and incinerators, ensuring that the pace of death never faltered. Every detail served the relentless quota system of this industrialized genocide. Within the camp hierarchy, these women answered to male SS officers. Yet their dominion over female prisoners was unchallenged. In this microcosm of total power, young guards wielded life and death authority, for which they had been neither born nor bred. But power had been thrust into their hands with devastating effect. By viewing prisoners as mere biological resources to be harvested or discarded, these overseers perfected a method of control that merged bureaucratic precision with primal violence. Figures such as Maria Mandel and Irma Gries epitomized the system's lethal efficacy. Maria Mandl, elevated to the rank of SS Oberaufseherin at Auschwitz-Birkenau, supervised the entire female compound. She devised collective punishment regimes that shattered group morale and personally selected victims for barbarous medical experiments. Her name became synonymous with orchestrated terror. She balanced administrative paperwork with the orchestration of brutality, as though both tasks were equivalent in her eyes. Irma Gries, not yet 20 years old, carved out a reputation for ferocity that outshone many of her senior counterparts. Armed with a riding crop and supported by specially trained attack dogs, she roamed the camp blocks, seeking out those with the slightest mark of beauty or defiance. Under her gaze, a prisoner's fate could hinge on the color of her hair or the firmness of her posture. Gries's youth did not temper her cruelty instead. It fueled an intoxicating sense of empowerment that made her one of the most feared figures in the camp. Together, these women embodied the fusion of ideological indoctrination and cold administrative efficiency that defined the Nazi extermination machine. They were not aberrations, but products of a system designed to mobilize every resource, human, mechanical, and psychological, in service of genocide. In their hands, the apparatus of death became both surgical and savage, ensuring that no individual would escape the terrifying reality of state-sanctioned annihilation. Camp-to-camp rotation served as a brutal crucible, forging ever greater cruelty among the female overseers. A guard might begin her service at Ravensbruck performing administrative tasks, registering prisoners, issuing ration cards, then be transferred to Auschwitz, the epicenter of industrial extermination, where selections and gassings were sped into overdrive. Finally, she could end up at Bergen-Belsen, a terminal station where starvation, disease, and exposure wrought suffering that transcended even the harshest punishments. In this gauntlet of escalating violence, each posting stripped away traces of empathy, replacing it with a hunger for power and a facile contempt for human life. Performance evaluations, encoded in meticulous SS reports, rewarded ferocity, willingness to enforce brutal discipline without hesitation, earned top marks. Those who flinched under pressure or showed mercy were deemed unreliable. Young Jana Bormann exemplified the system's perverse meritocracy. Despite her youth, she was rapidly promoted for her zeal in meting out collective punishments. Post-war tribunals would later condemn her to death for war crimes, a grim testament to the lethal efficiency the SS prized above all. When the Third Reich finally collapsed in the waning months of 1944 through early 1945, SS female guards responded in diverse manners, some sensing an inevitable defeat, fled their stations and blended into the civilian exodus. They shed uniforms and identification cards, slipping into refugee columns, a human tide overwhelming every checkpoint. Others, bound by ideological fanaticism or sheer habit, clung to their posts until the last possible moment. In Bergen-Belsen, archival records betray a chilling truth. Prisoners were left to starve through the final week before liberation, as guards maintained guard duty and rationed out meager scraps with ruthless calculation. The chaos of post-war disintegration provided a perfect cloak for these women to vanish. SS personnel files were scattered, destroyed, or seized by competing Allied units. Camp registries were burned or buried in mass graves. Boundaries shifted rapidly between British, American, and Soviet occupation zones, creating gaps in jurisdiction Local denazification offices were overwhelmed, understaffed, or corrupt. In the maelstrom of millions of displaced persons, a female guard without a name could melt into anonymity with ease. False identity papers, often purchased through black market networks, granted passage across borders. Some slipped south into the Alps, others west into Belgium or north into Denmark. This initial lapse in accountability laid the groundwork for decades of evasion. As Europe rebuilt from rubble, the pursuit of former SS guards faded beneath drafts of new political priorities and the exigencies of the emerging Cold War. Many had already established new lives, married, renamed, rebranded as homemakers, shopkeepers, or factory workers. Those who had evaded capture in 1945 found that the world had little appetite to revisit their past, and so, empowered by both their own ruthlessness and the post-war disarray, these women embarked on journeys of disappearance that spanned continents and generations. Their integration into ordinary society, often under assumed identities, became a final act of defiance against the justice they had once wielded so remorselessly. The full scope of this escape would not be reckoned with until decades later, when determined investigators and survivors would begin to uncover the hidden faces behind the camp gates. Until then, the SS women who once commanded terror slipped into the shadows, their stories obscured by time and the very chaos they helped unleash. When the Third Reich finally collapsed in the closing months of 1944 and the opening weeks of 1945, SS female overseers reacted with stunning variability. Many chose panic over principle. They tore off their insignia, burned or discarded service records, and vanished into the flood of civilians, fleeing advancing armies. They traded their black uniforms for shabby coats, hoping to blend in with refugees. Yet just as many remained defiantly at their posts, their fanaticism unshaken. Even as Allied tanks appeared on the horizon, these women enforced starvation and brutality with the same cold resolve they had always shown. Archival records from Bergen-Belsen capture the depths of this loyalty to terror. In the week preceding liberation, starving prisoners lay gaunt and hollow-eyed. Yet guard duty and rationing continued without mercy. Overseers calculated every calorie, ensuring that the weakest perished first. The result was a human toll that made ghastly martyrdom of hunger nearly as swift as the gas chambers themselves. On April 15, 1945, the British 11th Armored Regiment roared into Bergen-Belsen to confront an apocalypse. They found decomposing corpses lined up in mass graves and prisoners on the brink of death, their skeletons draped in tattered rags. The stench of decay hung heavy as soldiers moved through rows of half-collapsed huts. Eyes widened at the scale of horror. Without hesitation, they arrested 47 SS personnel, including 21 women. These detainees were marched into the very barracks where their victims had languished. In full view of emaciated survivors, British officers photographed each guard, recorded their names, and filed reports that would become critical war crime evidence. Many of the women displayed outrage rather than remorse, protesting that they had been mistreated and even expecting preferential treatment as SS officers. Their entitlement, in the face of catastrophic proof of atrocity, underscored the chilling depth of their indoctrination. The pattern repeated across liberated camps, American forces sweeping through Buchenwald and Dachau likewise rounded up female SS guards on the spot, handcuffing them amid transport wagons and hospital barracks. In the east, Soviet troops arriving at Majdanek and Stutthof encountered similar scenes, battered prisoners and rotting corpses, followed by the swift arrest of remaining camp staff. On more than one occasion, enraged survivors seized escaping overseers first, subjecting them to rough justice before Allied intervention. Thus began the relentless hunt for SS women, once architects of fear, now prisoners under Allied guard. Their capture at the moment of liberation ensured that the evidence of their crimes remained untainted by exile. Yet the chaos of those final days also enabled many to slip away, setting the stage for decades of pursuit, trial, and the slow reckoning with the female face of genocide. The liberation of concentration camps did not end at Bergen-Belsen alone. At Buchenwald and Dachau, Allied troops rounded up dozens of SS female overseers whose reign of terror had persisted behind electrified fences. Some of these women attempted desperate masquerades, discarding their insignia, smearing their uniforms with dirt, and slipping into prisoner ranks, but such gambits rarely succeeded. The Allies moved with ruthless efficiency, establishing dedicated investigative teams to sift through the chaos. Survivors proved invaluable. Those who had served in camp administration, clerk typists, and office aides stepped forward to identify their tormentors. One such witness was 23-year-old Czech survivor Catherine Niger, who, having cataloged names and faces in the grievous hours of captivity, pointed out several former guards to British investigators. Her testimony ignited a broader manhunt, triggering a cascade of arrests that rippled through liberated camps. Parallel to survivor interviews, the Allies deployed denazification questionnaires to every German civilian over 18. These forms, ostensibly designed to root out high-ranking Nazis, inadvertently exposed a network of deceit. Female overseers who had falsified their wartime occupations, claiming to be factory workers or office clerks, found their lies unmasked when their names, birth dates, and addresses were cross-checked against SS payroll ledgers and transfer logs. Joint task forces of British, American, and French officers meticulously compared entries in civilian registries with SS administrative records, unearthing dozens of women who had thought themselves anonymous. By the summer and autumn of 1945, this dual-pronged approach, combining eyewitness identification with documentary verification, yielded a significant haul of war criminals. In some sectors, over 50 female SS personnel were detained within weeks, each dossier enriched by official pay stubs listing service in the SS Guard Corps, letters of commendation from camp commandants, and promotion notices celebrating their zeal in enforcing camp discipline. Local German police forces, reconstituted under Allied supervision, played their part. They conducted house-to-house inquiries in towns surrounding former campsites, following up on rumors of discarded SS uniforms, hidden in attic trunks or buried in garden plots. Villagers, eager to demonstrate their loyalty to the new regime or simply to settle old scores, supplied tips that led investigators to cache after cache of incriminating ephemera, SS training manuals, handwritten duty rosters, and maps detailing prisoner barracks. Even so, a handful of particularly resourceful overseers slipped through the net, trading forged identity papers on black market bulletin boards and fleeing across occupation zone borders. Yet the overwhelming majority who had served with SS headquarters or supervised forced labor detachments found themselves in Allied custody before they could vanish. Their apprehension shattered any lingering illusion that female perpetrators could escape accountability simply by blending into post-war Germany. This rigorous campaign laid the foundation for the military tribunals that would follow by turning survivor testimony and SS archival data into prosecutable evidence. The Allies transformed what had been an unprecedented apparatus of female-led terror into a catalog of indictable offenses. The months after liberation thus marked a critical juncture, a reckoning in which the role of SS women, once hidden in plain sight, was finally exposed and recorded for posterity. Despite a capture, the detention conditions for SS female guards varied starkly by occupation zone. In the Western sector, British and American authorities often confined these women within the very SS barracks they once commanded, providing nothing more than threadbare blankets to ward off the chill. Yet, this minimal comfort was a calculated cruelty. Guards were compelled to witness the gruesome aftermath of their own orders by being forced without gloves to help clear mass graves and manage decomposing corpses. Every drag of their bare hands through festering remains was intended to inflict psychological torment, ensuring that the stench of rotting flesh and the weight of guilt would haunt them. Beyond this macabre labor, on-site interrogations were generally perfunctory. Western Allied investigators focused primarily on extracting names of fellow perpetrators and identifying documentation, rather than meting out harsh questioning or prolonged confinement in brutal conditions. The goal, it seemed, was to balance expediency with a veneer of humane treatment. Even as these former overseers confronted the consequences of their own brutality. In stark contrast, Soviet authorities adopted an unrelenting doctrine of retribution in the eastern sector. Captured female guards were stripped from their barracks and transported to specialized interrogation centers in Berlin, Krakow, or Moscow. There, the full weight of Soviet interrogation tactics was unleashed. Techniques ranged from relentless sleep deprivation to psychological manipulation, all calibrated to crush resistance and extract confessions of complicity and the whereabouts of hidden documents. Detainees were held in austere cells, icy floors, barred windows, and scant rations until their physical and mental reserves collapsed. Declassified reports, released decades after the war, revealed that approximately 249 female guards were initially processed under Soviet custody. A figure that underscores the scale of this relentless campaign. Mortality rates in the Eastern Zone prison system were significantly higher than those recorded under Western Allied control. A grim testament to the severity of the conditions imposed, survivor testimonies in official archives recount harrowing scenes: women reduced to skeletal frames, their health deteriorating at astonishing speed under the strain of cold, hunger, and non-stop interrogation. One witness described a former overseer who, within days of arrival at a Moscow facility, had developed frostbite and severe malnutrition. Her voice, barely more than a whisper. Another recounted how guards, once proud enforcers of terror, were left trembling on the bare concrete, pleading for water or a scrap of bread, please, met with silence or the promise of further punishment. In these Soviet centers, the line between interrogation and torture was blurred. Confessions obtained under duress were often rubber-stamped as official testimony, sealing the fates of others implicated in the extermination machinery. This bifurcated treatment not only reflected ideological differences between the Allies, but also set precedents for post-war justice. Western methods prioritized documentation and expedited trials, while Soviet procedures emphasized retribution and deterrence through sheer severity. For the SS women caught in this maelstrom, the nature of their confinement would drastically shape their post-war trajectories, some emerging, broken, and unrecognizable. Others swallowed entirely by the Eastern system's unforgiving machinery. In either zone, however, one truth remained immutable. The former overseers could no longer wield power without consequence. Their fates now subject to the very apparatus of authority they once served. The first military tribunal to try SS female guards convened at Lüneburg in September 1945 under the presidency of British General H.P. M. Ficklin. Among the 45 accused stood 16 women, among them Irma Gries, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Herta Bormann, whose faces had once loomed large over the barracks. International press descended in force, cameras clicking as these mistresses of misery lined up against the backdrop of still recovering survivors. For 54 days, the court balanced direct cross-examination with sworn testimony, meticulously dissecting charges of murder, torture, and the orchestration of selections for the gas chambers. Notably, the indictment steered clear of crimes against Germans or stateless persons, focusing exclusively on atrocities committed against Allied nationals and prisoners of war. Survivors and forensic experts delivered harrowing accounts. Dr. Dora Safran, a camp doctor pressed into service by the SS for cruel pseudo-experiments, testified to witnessing Grace unleash specially trained hounds upon pregnant inmates, the snarling beasts ripping at flesh, while guards watched with perverse delight. Anita Alaska, a former stenographer in the women's compound, provided chilling detail of Volkenrath's collective punishments. Prisoners forced into groups and beaten mercilessly with leather whips until their backs were one living canvas of welts. Each witness recounted scenes so graphic that the courtroom fell silent. The weight of evidence crushing any doubt about the defendants' roles in systematic killing. Faced with this unrelenting testimony, the defense mounted a familiar strategy. Most of the women claimed they had been ordered to obey by male superiors, invoking the doctrine of absolute obedience. Others invoked their youth and lack of worldly experience, insisting they had been naive recruits who simply did not comprehend the camp's final purpose. A handful argued they performed only administrative tasks, never personally wielding a whip or pulling a trigger, but the tribunal, armed with SS personnel files and training records, demolished these arguments. Detailed curricula from Ravensbruck exposed explicit instruction in ideological indoctrination and violent enforcement techniques. Internal memos and performance evaluations praised each woman for zealously maintaining order and demonstrating unwavering firmness toward subhuman elements. Such documentation rendered the claims of ignorance and compulsion utterly implausible. General Ficklin's court warned that the machinery of genocide could not be absolved by slender defenses or youthful protestations. The rigor with which the prosecution assembled documentary and testimonial proof underscored a singular message: participation in an extermination apparatus at any level carried inescapable culpability. On the final day of proceedings, the tribunal declared that systematic violence was neither a mere byproduct of war nor an unfortunate side effect. It was a deliberate policy executed by individuals who, regardless of gender, had chosen cruelty over conscience. Thus ended the Bergen-Belsen trial, setting a precedent that would echo through subsequent military tribunals. No officer, no secretary, no overseer could hide behind orders once the scales of justice weighed their actions. The fates of those women, some sentenced to death, others to lengthy imprisonment, served as stark testament to the principle that ideology and obedience are no shield against accountability when the gravest crimes against humanity are at stake. On the 17th of November, 1945, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Irma Gries, Elizabeth Volkenrath, Herta Bormann, and 8 other female overseers were condemned to death. The remaining women on trial received long sentences of hard labor. In December, the condemned were led to the gallows at Hameln Prison, where the hangings were carried out under the watchful eyes of British soldiers and medical officers. Among them, the 22-year-old Irma Gries became notorious as the youngest woman ever executed under British jurisdiction. In a final display of cold composure, her last words were a terse request to have the noose secured swiftly, an icy reminder of her unrepentant demeanor even in death. As the echoes of the Hameln executions reverberated through post-war Europe, justice pressed on in other occupied territories. In Poland, the Auschwitz trial commenced in late 1946. Convening in Krakow under Polish authority, there, Maria Mandel, once SS Oberaufseherin of the Birkenau women's camp, and 39 of her fellow officers, stood accused of orchestrating unspeakable atrocities. After a rigorous process of witness testimony, documentary evidence, and forensic detail, Mandel and several co-defendants received death sentences in December of 1947. Their executions closed a dark chapter at the very site where industrialized killing had been perfected barely a year earlier, between April through May of 1946. The Stutthof trial in Gdansk brought 5 female SS overseers to public justice. On a makeshift scaffold before an assembly of more than 50 local citizens, these women, once agents of terror, were hanged in full view of the community they had once terrorized. The spectacle was more than mere punishment. It was a deliberate reckoning, an unflinching declaration that female perpetrators could not hide behind patriarchal assumptions of gentility or innocence. Collectively, these proceedings shattered any illusion that the machinery of genocide was a purely masculine enterprise. For the first time, the world witnessed women, trained at Ravensbruck, hardened at Auschwitz, and remorseless at Bergen-Belsen brought to account. Prosecutors meticulously laid out evidence of selections for the gas chambers, sadistic beatings, forced labor quotas, and the orchestration of human suffering. Survivors testified without fear, recounting how Grace's dogs tore at Mother's arms, how Volkenrath's whip fell upon the backs of the condemned, and how Mandel personally selected naked women for deadly medical experiments. Defenses of following orders, youthful naivete, or merely administrative duty collapsed under the weight of SS training manuals and performance evaluations lauding ruthless efficiency. The explicit instructions in those records, combined with the harrowing eyewitness accounts, left no room for ambiguity. These were not passive clerks or unwitting functionaries, but active agents in the final solution. In holding these women responsible, the Allied and Polish courts reaffirmed a fundamental principle of international law. Participation in systematic atrocities carries individual culpability, regardless of rank or gender. The sentences rendered between 1945 and 1947 established enduring precedents for crimes against humanity, underscoring that the cloak of uniform and the veil of femininity offer no refuge from justice. Ultimately, these trials delivered a resounding message: when terror is a collective enterprise, accountability must be equally universal. After the Bergen-Belsen trial concluded, Irma Gries and the other condemned women faced the gallows in December 1945. They were escorted to Hameln prison, hoods drawn, and hanged before ranks of British soldiers and medical officers. The image of 22-year-old Greece stepping calmly onto the trapdoor, demanding that the noose be tied swiftly, reverberated across Britain and Europe. A chilling testament to her unbroken composure, even in the face of death. Meanwhile, in occupied Poland, the Auschwitz trial convened in late 1946 to bring Maria Mandel, infamously known as the Queen of the Birkenau Women's Camp, and 39 of her SS colleagues to justice. After months of witness testimony, detailing selections for gas chambers, sadistic beatings, and the orchestration of medical experiments, the Polish Supreme National Tribunal delivered its sentence in December 1947. Mandel, found guilty of crimes against humanity, was hanged at Montelupik prison in Krakow, bringing to a close one of the darkest chapters of Holocaust atrocities on continental Europe, barely a season earlier. From April through May of 1946, the Stutthof trial in Gdańsk put a further spotlight on female complicity in genocide. Among those prosecuted were Gerda Steinhoff, Jenny Weisler, and Elsa Barker, names once whispered in terror among inmates. In a stark departure from the relative anonymity of many camps, 5 women were publicly executed by hanging atop Biskupia Gorka Hill before an audience of roughly 50 local residents. The sight of former overseers, once empowered to mete out cruelty, dangling from the scaffold, underscored the reversal of power that justice demands. The Stutthof proceedings also examined the case of Ilse Koch, the notorious witch of Buchenwald, infamous for selecting tattooed prisoners whose skins were later fashioned into lampshades and bookbindings. Initially, an American military court reduced her sentence, provoking international outrage. Under mounting diplomatic and public pressure, a West German court in Augsburg revisited her case in 1951, handing down a life sentence. Koch died in custody in 1967, steadfastly denying every accusation to her last breath. These landmark trials shattered any lingering illusion that the machinery of genocide operated solely under male command. For the first time, women, often dismissed by patriarchal assumptions as incapable of such calculated cruelty, stood trial not as passive adjuncts, but as active architects of terror. The very public nature of their execution served as a potent symbol. Gender offers no sanctuary when the gravest crimes are committed in the glare of international scrutiny. These proceedings marked a crucial shift in global consciousness. They reaffirmed that genocide transcends gender boundaries and that the cloak of uniform does not exempt an individual from personal accountability. From the oak-lined walls of Hameln to the scaffold at Biskupia Gorka, justice proclaimed an unequivocal decree: every perpetrator, man or woman, must answer for the lives they destroyed. The defenses, mounted by SS women on trial, were strikingly uniform. Most claimed they had been forced to obey orders, lacked sufficient experience, performed only administrative duties, or did not know the camp's ultimate purpose. Yet the military tribunals dismantled these arguments comprehensively. Training records from Ravensbruck exposed explicit instruction in ideological indoctrination and brutal enforcement techniques, leaving no room for ignorance. Survivor testimonies delivered under oath recounted firsthand the overseers' direct involvement in selections, beatings, and gas chamber operations. SS personnel transfer logs and performance evaluations further corroborated each woman's active service across multiple camps. The notion of blind obedience was rejected outright. For international law had long established the right and duty to refuse inhuman orders. Despite landmark trials at Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, and Stutthof that brought more than 100 female overseers before the bar of justice, these prosecutions accounted for fewer than 3% of the approximately 3,500 women who had served as SS guards. The overwhelming majority vanished into post-war Europe. Some escaped capture altogether. Others assumed false identities that eluded Allied investigators. In the fog of liberation, with SS records destroyed or scattered, most female perpetrators slipped through jurisdictional cracks and remained beyond the reach of tribunals. By 1949, the pace of military justice began to decelerate sharply. British and American courts gradually relinquished authority over war crimes to newly established civilian courts in the Federal Republic of Germany. These fledgling tribunals, however, were hamstrung by limited manpower and competing priorities. The urgent task of rebuilding a devastated nation and the looming specter of Soviet expansion diverted attention and resources away from exhaustive war crime prosecutions. As a result, many pending cases languished in backlog or were settled with minimal inquiry. This cooling of female SS prosecutions reflected a profound realignment of political imperatives. Once the machinery of Holocaust justice had rolled forth, it was soon halted by the exigencies of European reconstruction and the strategic drive to contain communism. Prisoners who had served prison terms were frequently granted clemency or early release. As the nascent West German administration sought labor for its factories and farms, sentence reductions became commonplace under pressures of re-education programs and manpower shortages. In many instances, women who had overseen torture and murder walked free, shielded by pragmatic concessions to the new geopolitical order. The tragic outcome of this shift is stark. Only a handful of SS women ever faced the full weight of criminal accountability, while their male counterparts sometimes endured lengthier sentences. Most female guards evaded severe punishment altogether. The vast majority, over 97%, never stood trial. Their roles in the machinery of genocide buried beneath the rubble of a continent in recovery. This legacy of impunity underscores a bitter truth. When legal zeal yields to political expediency, justice for the most heinous crimes becomes a casualty of realpolitik. In the maelstrom of post-war Europe, a vast number of SS female overseers slipped through the cracks thanks to clandestine escape networks known as ratlines. These corridors of flight, orchestrated by pro-SS sympathizers, rogue Vatican clergy, and elements within the International Red Cross, funneled war criminals out of Allied reach. Their destination of choice became South America, where the regime of President Juan Perón in Argentina actively welcomed ex-German officers for their technical expertise. In Buenos Aires, Córdoba, and Bariloche, well-established German enclaves provided an ideal cover. Neighbors shared dialects. Churches offered sanctuary, and local businesses absorbed newcomers into the fabric of daily life, all while official scrutiny remained minimal and press inquiries scarce. One of the most notorious cases was that of Hermine Braunsteiner, a former guard at Ravensbruck and Majdanek. After her initial arrest in Austria and a mere 3-year sentence, she vanished aboard a ratline vessel and resurfaced in North America under the alias Hermine Rasidinsky, serving as a humble domestic worker in Canada and later the United States. She remained free until 1979, when Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal exposed her true identity. Her reveal shocked communities where she had quietly lived as a nobody, rekindling horror at how easily a perpetrator of industrialized murder could don the guise of ordinary womanhood. Bronsteiner's story was hardly unique. Many other female guards boarded the same clandestine routes to Uruguay, Paraguay, or Brazil, acquiring new names and falsified documents to erase their pasts. Some took the simplest route they claimed to be unskilled laborers, finding work on farms or in small-scale manufacturing, under layers of camouflage language lessons, forged passports, even arranged marriages. They melted into immigrant populations. Over time, their former identities became ghostly whispers, known only to complicit network operators and local fixers who profited from their concealment, the Allies. Overwhelmed by the simultaneous tasks of repatriating millions of refugees and preventing the spread of communism, lacked both the manpower and the political will to pursue every fugitive guard. Border controls buckled under the weight of human tides, and denazification efforts faltered as Western powers prioritized economic recovery and defense against the Soviet threat. This failure created a justice vacuum, a blank zone wherein countless SS women escaped accountability. Their departure into anonymity underscored a bitter truth. The very chaos that liberated Europe also shielded its most heinous operators from retribution. In this era of impunity, the vast majority of SS female overseers rewrote their life stories as inconspicuous citizens, far removed from the gas chambers and the whips they once wielded, while a handful were eventually unmasked and brought to trial. Most faded into obscurity, their crimes buried beneath the rubble of a continent desperate to rebuild. As décades passed, the memory of their atrocities dimmed in public consciousness. Yet the legacy of their escape casts a long shadow. It stands as a stark reminder that when geopolitical expediency eclipses moral duty, justice becomes the collateral damage of history's most devastating conflicts. When the Cold War reached its zenith, former SS female guards found themselves in an astonishing role, reversal from operators of terror to assets in the Western intelligence battle against the Soviet bloc. Agencies such as the Central Intelligence Agency and the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the West German Federal Intelligence Service, recognized that these women possessed intimate knowledge of Eastern Europe's transport networks, languages, and political structures. One of the most notorious examples was Hildegard Lechert, once dubbed the Majdanek Tigress for her ferocity at Ravensbruck and Majdanek. After serving a brief prison term, she was quietly recruited by the CIA to gather intelligence on Soviet movements in Poland and Czechoslovakia. In covert safe houses and disguised as a displaced person, Lechert fed Western handlers names, rail schedules, and security protocols she had learned firsthand. Similarly, an SS treasurer with extensive experience overseeing Reichsbahn logistics in occupied Poland was tapped by the BND during the 1950s and 60s. Under a covert operation, she was granted British citizenship through a classified process, enabling her to operate under diplomatic cover in London and Paris. Her duties ranged from human resources analysis to coordinating émigré networks that monitored Soviet-controlled territories. The irony was, bitter women who had once organized forced deportations were now repurposed to track Cold War refugees and defectors, their moral culpability set aside in service of geopolitical expediency. Across the board, numerous former female guards found long-term placements within British, American, and West German intelligence establishments, protected by policies of strategic immunity. They escaped extradition requests, and criminal proceedings. Declassified German federal documents reveal that when Yugoslavia formally requested the extradition of suspected war criminals in 1951, Bonn refused, citing these individuals' operational value over historical justice. Under the Basic Law of 1949 and subsequent legislation, West Germany instituted statutes of limitations for various crimes, effectively closing the door on prosecutions for genocide, forced labor, and other violations of humanity. Between 1950 and 1970, a silent reintegration took hold. Many former overseers took up mundane trades, factory assembly, retail sales, or domestic service in quiet provincial towns. There, amid small-town anonymity, they slipped into innocuous lives, marrying local men. They adopted husbands' surnames, burying their SS identities beneath layers of normalcy. Their children grew up unaware that their mothers had once wielded whips and overseen selections for the gas chambers. These women attended church on Sundays, shopped at neighborhood markets, and volunteered in community groups, all while their past atrocities remained unspoken shadows. Local officials, preoccupied with economic recovery and eager to demonstrate a forward-looking Germany, rarely probed beyond official files. The collective amnesia was reinforced by propaganda campaigns that cast West Germany as a victim of totalitarianism, rather than its enabler. This era of reintegration was neither accidental nor benign. It was facilitated by deliberate policy choices that subordinated accountability to anti-communist priorities. The same powers that had condemned these women in court now placed them on payrolls as analysts and informants. Their reinvention as useful citizens underscored a brutal calculus intelligence gathered on the Eastern Bloc was worth more than the moral imperative to punish those who had engineered genocide. In the quiet towns and intelligence offices of the Western Alliance, former SS female guards lived out the paradox of history, architects of mass murder, yet reintegrated and even honored for the secrets they could still reveal. Their stories stand as searing reminders that geopolitical expediency can, and often does, eclipse the relentless pursuit of justice. From the late 1970s, a decisive wave of breaking the silence swept through the post-war landscape. In 1977, the Simon Wiesenthal Center was founded specifically to reignite the hunt for Nazi war criminals. Allied by survivor organizations and independent investigators, it spearheaded international campaigns, tracing fugitives through tip lines, interviewing descendants of victims, and collaborating with law enforcement agencies across 4 continents. Investigators pored over archival photographs from Ravensbruck, Auschwitz, and Majdanek, painstakingly matching faces and uniforms to contemporary images. They harnessed emerging audio forensic techniques to analyze accents and intonation patterns in recorded interviews, linking suspects to specific camps. Coordination between Interpol, French gendarmes, Israeli Mossad agents, and West German prosecutors turned the world into a manhunt zone, leaving no SS star unscathed. These efforts culminated in a series of late trials that tested the resolve of justice. The case of Hildegard Leichert, adjudicated from 1975 through 1981 in Dusseldorf, became emblematic. Over the course of more than 5 years, more than 350 witnesses, including former prisoners, camp doctors, and railway workers, took the stand. Though Leichert's advancing age and frail health often elicited sympathy, the tribunal refused to bow to sentiment. She was convicted of direct involvement in selections and beatings, receiving a lengthy prison sentence that, while reduced on appeal, underscored the principle that time does not erase guilt. Each year of incarceration carried symbolic weight. Serving as a moral ledger against the machinery of genocide she once helped operate. Concurrently, cultural reckonings shattered public complacency in West Germany. Claude Lanzmann's 9-hour documentary, Shoah, released in 1985 after a decade of production, confronted audiences with unflinching survivor testimonies and panoramic shots of former campsites. When the American television miniseries Holocaust aired in 1979, it drew an audience of millions in the Federal Republic, forcing a national confrontation with the unspoken trauma of the past. These media provocations spurred legislative action in 1979. West Germany formally abolished statutes of limitations for crimes against humanity. This legal shift ensured that temporal distance could not be wielded as an escape route for perpetrators. By the mid-1980s, renewed zeal yielded tangible results. A string of rearrests and prosecutions unfolded in France, Israel, Switzerland, and the Federal Republic itself. Former female overseers, some living tranquil lives as pensioners found themselves shackled and transported back to courtrooms where survivors once again testified. International media outlets, from the New York Times to Le Monde, headlined these developments with clarion call editorials demanding that the flame of justice for the Holocaust never be extinguished. These campaigns and trials crystallized a harsh lesson: systemic genocide transcends generational boundaries, and accountability cannot be deferred indefinitely. Whether wielding a whip or maintaining office files, every individual who participated in the machinery of death must face the consequences. In the end, gender proved no shield. Women who once harnessed power over life and death were compelled to reckon with their actions, proving that the gates of justice, though slow to close, remain open to all who stand accused of crimes against humanity. This video delivers an immense historical and moral value. For the first time, audiences are confronted with a hidden dimension of the Holocaust: the proactive and brutal participation of thousands of female SS overseers through archival documents, survivor testimonies, and incontrovertible evidence of their crimes. It obliterates any lingering prejudice that only men could wield power to oppress and kill. From the indoctrination camps at Ravensbruck to the military tribunals at Lüneburg, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, and Stutthof, every image and every statistic stands as proof that genocidal ambition penetrated even those whom society once trusted to embody gentleness and compassion. Secondly, the video underscores a powerful message about authority and individual responsibility. When the Nazi regime entrusted these murderous roses with the power of life and death, they turned themselves without hesitation into instruments of destruction. They demonstrated that anyone, regardless of gender or social background, can become a perpetrator of unspeakable cruelty if molded by toxic ideology and denied the freedom to question inhuman orders. The painful lesson it delivers is unambiguous. Absolute power breeds absolute abuse, and moral courage demands the refusal of orders that violate basic human dignity. The video also chronicles a decades-long quest for justice that only yielded partial results, from the very first military tribunals that condemned dozens of female SS guards to death, to the belated manhunts carried out by the Simon Wiesenthal Center and Western intelligence services. Viewers see clearly that justice never truly sleeps, even when delayed or overshadowed by political and economic pressures. When spotlights banish the darkness, the atrocities of the past are laid bare, and no criminal enterprise, however well concealed, can remain hidden forever. Through this presentation, we learn the vital importance of preserving historical memory, meticulous record-keeping, safeguarding documentary evidence, and sharing the vivid narratives of those who endured the camps are indispensable to preventing collective amnesia. By remembering each name, date, and circumstance, we not only honor the victims who perished, but also instill in future generations the warning that forgetting past horrors risks repeating them. Historical truth is our strongest bulwark against the resurgence of inhumanity. Moreover, the video sounds an urgent alarm about the resurgence of authoritarianism and racial supremacism. In an era marked by surges of xenophobia, religious intolerance, and even domestic terror, the image of SS female guards stands as a stark illustration of how hatred can transform ordinary individuals into killers. Their story reminds us to remain ever vigilant, to renounce every ideology of discrimination, and to champion the values of diversity and humanness in our communities. Finally, this conclusion calls each viewer to move beyond passive observation to active engagement, continue researching and teaching history, support human rights organizations, and participate in commemorative events so that the ideals of justice remain alive. Only when every generation understands the cost of indifference and silence can society prevent the rise of similar evils in the future. This video's ending is not a full stop, but the beginning of our collective awakening and unwavering commitment to uphold human dignity.